Thank you. Um, so I'm not going to pretend here to be an expert on Wikibase, and in fact, I'm hoping to learn from people who know more about it. But this is sort of the vision that I have had, or what I'm going to express here is what I think the way Federation ought to work with Wikibases, and so we'll get into why and how. But maybe somebody's already thought of this, and there's already a plan for this. I may not be familiar with it, so we'll get to that. So why Federation? Why do we need Federation? Wikidata is pretty big now. Billions of edits, billions of statements, over 100 million items. But it really can't be everything. We heard yesterday from the WTQS, the query service people, about sort of limitations and what they're planning to do. I'd actually kind of misunderstood what the plan was. I thought they were going to split off scholarly articles completely as a separate Wikibase or something, which was where sort of this motivation to try to get Federation working better came from for me. But anyway, that's not currently the plan. But still, there are a number of data sets that are on the order of the size of Wikidata as a whole right now, or even much bigger. So I just listed a few here. One is astronomical objects. We don't have a lot of them in Wikidata, but we do have a catalog. Sorry, somebody's trying to call me. We do have a catalog of over 1 billion stars from the Gaia project. And many of them have a lot of information about them, and it'd be nice to have that data associated with each star in its own item somewhere in a Wikibase. Oops, sorry. Legal entities. There's this Open Corporates database that has over 200 million businesses listed. So it would be nice, a Wikibase with that would be useful, I think. Scholarly articles, so that's the WikiCite case. Wikidata has something like 40 million, but the total scope is several times larger than that. And it'd be nice to have all of them available. Materials and chemicals is another case. Genealogy, of course, people. we have historical relationships between people. We have several million of those in Wikidata, but most people are not considered notable to have their own records, and so having a separate Wikibase that has more detailed information about people could make a lot of sense. So yeah, even if we could stuff all this stuff into Wikidata itself, it's probably the scope of these other projects would be different than what it is for Wikidata, and notability would be different, criteria different, and licensing might be different. So anyway, there's a need for having separate Wikibases, but we also would want them to have a relation with Wikidata itself. So how, for example, so the WikiCite example, scholarly articles. How should we federate it with Wikidata? So we already have something like 40 million in Wikidata. So if this separate Wikibase for WikiCite existed, somehow we'd want to link them together so that identical items could be identified. And then any article items that had properties, any statements on those article items with the item values on the properties, such as author, main subject, and so forth. Ideally, if that wiki base was complete, maybe all that stuff would be in it as well. But that would actually make them quite large, especially with main subject. You'd have every material, disease, other thing that anything that scholars write about would be in there, and it makes much more sense to be able to point those to the Wikidata entries if there are such entries. rather than having local copies of everything. But either way, it seems like the properties should be able to point to both either a Wikidata entry or a local entry for items. Or perhaps to another separate Wikibase if we have a federation between other types of entities. And ideally, when you're looking at it, so when you look at an item in this potential WikiCite Wikibase, the user interface should look pretty much the same as it does in regular Wikidata, that you don't really see that there's much difference between a federated item value and a local item value. And then query service is similar. There should be pretty straightforward federation there. Yeah, so where are we? There is federation in the Wikidata query service. There's a long list of other Sparkle endpoints that you can use. So in principle, that works. The Wikibase, so I tried to get into, trying to understand what federation has meant so far in Wikibase, and there's this federated properties feature where the properties in a Wikibase instance are just copied from Wikidata and synchronized, so you have the same property values, but you can have different items. I mean, that sounds useful, but that's not what I've been talking about here, and I'm not sure quite the status of it. It says in testing somewhere. And then looking at the page on federation in the MediaWiki Wikibase wiki area, I just quoted here, two-way federation between instances is probably a long way off. So what I'm talking about is maybe, I'm not sure it requires two-way federation. It's at least one-way federation of items from an external Wikibase into Wikidata. But maybe two-way would be even better. But anyway, sounds like it's not really on the roadmap at the moment. And looking at the 2023 development plan, I didn't see any mention of federation there. So what's going on? Well, anyway, I'm going to suggest what I think, the way I think it should work. First of all, just thinking about how federation works in other sorts of cases where there's a lot of, the internet itself is a distributed computing system, and the World Wide Web, the idea of URLs, resolving things with the domain name system, all that, it works. The link data, the idea there is, you have URLs that interlink. So statements in a graph can link things in all kinds of different places. It doesn't have to be all on one server. Although practically how to do that, again, we get into the Sparkle federation process. Email works. You have, again, based on DNS, you can send mail to anybody. There's shared authentication systems like OAuth. Recently, people have been excited about the Fediverse, which has that's based on a W3C standard activity pub, which I don't know a whole lot about, but it looked, I looked at the spec and it seems a bit complicated. So do we need something as complicated as activity pub for federating Wikibases? I don't think so. And what I'm going to suggest is basically something similar to just simple URL style interlinking, maybe with some caching. Sorry. Okay. So here's my here's my proposals. First of all, the idea would be to have a new data type. Currently, items have a data type in Wikibase of Wikibase item. So we could have a new federated item type. And then, so the data entry, I mean, however it's represented, basically the elements of a federated item would be the Q number, just as in a regular Wikibase, the item identifier, and then the URL for the Wikibase itself. So like wikidata.org or WikiCite.org if we had such a thing, or something else like that. And if you looked in the JSON underlying it, we'd have, so there's a value that's the Q number, and then we'd have to add, I guess, a Wikibase URL attribute, what the federated URL was. So it shouldn't be too hard to create such an item, I would think. The user interface somehow would have to fetch that data from a federated URL. Maybe the server would take care of it through some caching mechanism, or something browser side. I'm not sure how that would be best done. And this seems like the simplest possible thing to do. The only problem with this approach is that if you have both, you have your authors, or you have your main subjects that are, some of them are local and some of them are federated, you would have to have a separate property for each of those because it's got a separate data type. Wikibase item would be the local ones, and federated item would be the federated ones. So that duplication of properties, I think, is not really what we'd want. So here's proposal number 2, which is to modify the item data type, and just to allow this extra Wikibase URL as part of the item data type. So an item could either be a local item or it could be a federated item, and whether or not it had this Wikibase URL property would determine that. And then, that would, as far as user interface goes, it would look pretty much the same, except you enter the data as a QID and then an @ or something, wikidata.org or at wikicite.org or whatever. So this seems like a nice way to go, except that everything that looks at items needs to check for this new attribute. So maybe that's not a good idea. But anyway, that's I guess the alternative is to make a new data type, which is sort of this combination data type, and then migrate properties to this new data type. Third idea is maybe it shouldn't be just items. Maybe it should be everything, that all the entities. So properties, items, lexemes if they're supported, any other entity types. So that would be more consistent. Anyway, so those are sort of my 3 suggestions. And there's lots of questions that I'm not quite sure what to say about them. Yeah, so suppose you had a Wikibase already that had some things with the item data type, and you wanted to switch to a new sort of unified data type. Could we do that one by one, or I think there's some way to do that, probably. I guess the second question is, do we only need one-way federation back to Wikidata, or do we need interlinking between all the Wikibases somehow in their federation? Yeah. Should those federation URLs be on a list, either a whitelist to approve or a blacklist to disallow some? Probably there's some that we might want to block for some reason. Anyway, that's something that might be considered. Do we need to know, does Wikidata need to know that an item is being used in another Wikibase? If that is something that seems important, like to have a much wider what links here special page, for example, that might need some more complex interactions, as similar to ActivityPub, rather than just interlinking. What do we do about redirects if you've got a federated URL, a federated item that is merged or redirected into something else? Do we need bots that do something about that? Caching. Anyway, so those are some questions. Yeah. So maybe we can not quite sure which. Oh, we got a whole bunch of things. So, okay, looks like there's lots of questions already, and some in the Etherpad. So maybe I'll turn the time over to somebody to ask questions, and we can start a discussion here. Is Leah still on?
Thank you very much, Arthur, for this introduction to the topic. So I see that some discussions are already going on in the chat, but would someone like to unmute and give some insights or reflections on the topic?
So there's, I don't know if Sky Bristol would like to. That seems an important point.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah.
Early in the morning here. Yeah. So I mean, this is, you know, a fantastic thing that we need to figure out. I mean, across the community. I mean, the work that I'm doing right now in Wikibase.cloud, we're leveraging a lot of the content that we have in Wikidata, but we're needing to bring it into our own context and remodel things on the way because of problems, essentially semantic problems in how things have been defined and organized that don't conform to how we look at the world in the geosciences. That's the field that I'm coming from. And, you know, at the same time, we want to contribute that knowledge back. We want to contribute a lot of that information back in ways that everybody can take advantage of. We need a space that we can work against, but you know, we want to make sure that information is conformant to the global knowledge commons and is part of what everybody can take advantage of. So, I mean, the problems I don't think are so much in the mechanics of like how to do it. And you know, right now we're already recording foreign identifiers that resolve not just to Wikidata, but to other ontologies and other knowledge systems. That we can bring information back. We write bot code that takes advantage of those, goes out and grabs additional information, brings it back, reorganizes it, conform it to, you know, what we're trying to work with in some way. But that's really where the problems are. They're in the semantic collisions when things happen in one knowledge domain that sort of conform to how another knowledge domain looks at things, but not exactly the same way. And so everybody has to navigate that and figure out, you know, okay, what do I trust from here? What do I trust from there? And I mean, some things are fairly straightforward and we need to kind of set those up and use them to good effect. Other things are going to be a lot more controversial and challenging to try to deal with. So I think to some extent, that's why the problem hasn't been solved. I mean, there are mechanical problems of scalability and everything else, but I think the biggest problems are just that, you know, we're all trying to figure out how best to encode knowledge from all around the world in all kinds of different domains, and that's what this grand experiment is. And you know, how do we actually do that and have it make sense is really the big challenge.
Yeah, I can see that. Can you describe a little bit more how the URL? So you have bot code that so you have two items that are identified between what your Wikibase and Wikidata or something.
Yeah, I mean, the real thing that makes linked open data work in the world are persistent resolvable identifiers. And by resolvable, that means there's not only a place that a human being can go and visit the thing, but that a piece of software can go and get whatever is at the end of that URL in a cogent form that can be brought back. So, I mean, we can resolve, you know, Wikidata entities, whether properties or entities or whatever they happen to be. We can resolve identifiers from other vocabularies, from other sources in some way, and then, you know, take that information to good effect, get labels, get descriptions, get, you know, other triples and things that are involved in it. So as long as those
you have a lot of a particular sort of example, like I mean, suppose you're doing geo stuff, so like a location, maybe would that be something that you would?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a great resource out there built by a guy named Jolian Ralph, sorry, called MinDat. It's a fantastic resource for minerals information globally. It's better in a lot of ways than what Wikidata has, but kind of similar types of information. So that's a really good authority. They have their own identifier system, but they're resolvable through an API. And for our purposes, we only want certain information on certain minerals. So we federate with those, and we bring back those details that we need to use and organize them within a Wikibase environment for use for what we're doing. At the same time, then we build additional information on those that are specific to economic geology concerns, which is where I'm kind of coming from. And so that creates additional claims in Wikibase terms that can then be used by that other system to pull those things back. So, we're working with those guys on what's the unique information that we're going to contribute, what's the unique stuff that they're going to bring back, and then we'll federate that together. So that's kind of a specific example that's not Wikidata, but is kind of in the same vein.
Yeah, okay, I think I understand. Okay. There's a comment from Egon about how do we handle changes, keeping things consistent? Yeah, I think that's the redirect question. I guess I was asking is, how presumably bots can take care of that kind of thing, but we'd have to, as they do now in Wikidata itself. But maybe that doesn't address the full issue. I don't know if Egon wanted to say anything. There's a comment from Jane Darnell. Does this mean linked open data is dead and federated Wikibase is going to tackle the idea? I think they're two different things, but any experts on linked open data and how this is different?
So I don't think linked open data is dead, quite the opposite. And for me, the whole idea of federated Wikibases should build on linked open data concepts. Like Sky was talking about via external identifiers and things like that. And yeah, as Nikki says, Wikibase is just one part of the larger linked open data web. And yeah, so yes. In all, I'm wondering, so right now, a lot of existing Wikibases just use external IDs, and that's also how I think that should be in largest extent, to link to Wikidata or other Wikibases. So they use the external identifier data type, external ID data type. And I think the interesting piece where it comes together, which makes it more complicated than what you're getting at, is where you merge the item data type with wanting to link to items on other Wikibases. And that is not an entirely solved problem, but we had some ideas around this. I'm going to link in Fabricator class, where we looked at this for a similar problem on Commons, where you want, for example, to link to a creator of an artwork, and that creator could either be represented by an item on Wikidata, or it could be represented by an account on Flickr, or it could be a user page on Commons, and so on. So that's a similar issue, not solved, but there are some ideas around that that are worth exploring.
Yeah, thanks for linking that. That does seem very similar, although I think that proposal is a little more complicated than what I was thinking, because you're linking several quite different types of things together as a single.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Good. Okay. So there was a comment. Oh, Lawrence Perry. I thought the V2 federation plan was to use the same data type but make it possible to put a URL. Do we have any elaboration on that?
Lawrence also linked a Fabricator link below.
Oh, there we go. That's federated properties. So that's the thing that. So is that is kind of working, right? Or, but it's not. Anybody explain federated properties? How it's currently working?
So the idea was that you can use Wikidata's properties on other Wikibase instances, or not just Wikidata's property, other Wikibase instances as well. I'm not entirely sure, but I think the team had to turn this off for now to rethink the approach to it, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I saw it was in testing, but anyway, that's slightly different because that's you don't have a mix of local and remote ones. You just have.
Right. In the initial step, there was no mix, but the idea was to expand it to then also be able to mix, which is where a lot of the complexity comes in, right?
Yeah. How was that implemented? I mean, was it was Wikidata aware of the Wikibases that were subscribing to its properties, or was it like only on the other side that they were just doing a regular pull of the property data or something?
I'm not entirely sure how far that got, but in general, the idea was that sorry, that it that Wikidata needs to know which properties are used, so that when edits are made on Wikidata, that the others can be informed about that. Worst case, for example, vandalism, ugly vandalism that spreads, stuff like that.
Yeah, of course, that's yeah, that's going to be an issue. But if we're propagating every edit in some way, that's a big challenge.
Yeah. And maybe that's not what is needed in the end, right? But it clearly needs a lot more thinking and trying.
Yeah. So there's a comment about from Marco, Wikibase Cloud. It sounds like Wikibase Cloud would be a great place to experiment with stuff like this, if possible. Is there a way to have like a version of Wikibase with its own custom data types or something up there?
So someone could write new extensions to add new data types to a Wikibase, but I don't think we allow this on Wikibase Cloud because that's too much customization for Wikibase Cloud. But if you host your own Wikibase, then you can also install additional extensions with new data types.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't need to extend this if there's not a lot of things people want to talk about further. But again, I wanted to see, if there was any kind of consensus on the best way forward or something different here. So would anybody like to?
Sure, I'll chime in with one more thought. This is Sky Bristol. So just, for a bit of context, I mean, I do the work that I'm doing sort of part-time on my own time for things that I'm interested in, but I also work for the U.S. Geological Survey in the U.S. And so work that we're doing right now in geokb.wikibase.cloud is really all about figuring out how to organize the geoscience knowledge domain of that one U.S. government institution. and how we put that information together and project it out and connect it to the rest of the world so that other people can take advantage of what we know, but still do it within a context that makes sense for us. And so I guess what I'd suggest in this area, I mean, this is a huge thing that needs to be done. And, you know, when I first got into the work that I was starting there with a separate Wikibase, you know, I was regularly looking at big pots of information that we could leverage from Wikidata. Information on many of our people was already there. They were recorded as scientists because of, you know, work that we've done over time, or many of our publications were there. Some of our organizational units were there. And, you know, many of the concepts that we needed to connect with, you know, including geoscience concepts on chemical elements and everything are organized there. But the problem comes that, you know, other people have also built knowledge organization systems of those same things. You mentioned a few of them on one of your early slides. We have some big established authorities out there to some extent that have done a really good job within their particular domain of organizing things. And we need to take advantage of all of that. So basically in our work, every time we've gone into a new topical area, we look at some particular authorities in our fields to figure out what's going on, you know, ontologically. I mean, what have people really modeled in terms of classes and properties, and how does that need to look? We look at databases of instances that we want to work with, and we look at Wikidata with that. And in building out our Wikibase that's useful for our purposes, things that we can actually program and reason against, we're trying to make sense of all of that, make sense of all of those different connections through same as relationships, essentially. You know, we're declaring that, you know, our thing is the same as somebody else's thing over here. But the problem is those same as relationships almost always come with caveats. You know, it's the same as, except we're not exactly conformant to the sort of upward classification here, or we don't necessarily agree with all of the properties that have been included as claims, but, you know, these ones we do agree with and they work for us. And, you know, there are some significant problems and challenges in sort of how a lot of this comes about. One of the first discussions I got into on Wikidata years ago now was where somebody had gone in and written a bot based on common first names of gender and assigned gender values to all of our people. So we have, you know, 2,000 USGS scientists or so have, you know, Wikidata representation. Somebody went through and ran a bot to assign, you know, gender identity to all of those people. Obviously not something that you want somebody to do, but that sort of thing, you know, is fine in the global knowledge commons, but it needs to be governed in some way by the community. Coming together and saying, no, wait a minute, you got to roll that one back. That's not a valid approach to this. You know, go ahead and, you know, spin something off in your analysis that you want to run, but, you know, don't actually in place, you know, claims on these items in some way. So that's
sounds a little bit
yeah.
sounds a little bit like the issues that the Wikipedias have with using Wikidata data. Right?
Exactly.
They don't trust it.
So those are the real challenges I think that we need to address. And I mean, why I'm so excited about the Wikibase.cloud experiment is that is promoting and allowing these different domains to spin up, to really focus in on their semantics, to focus in on their structure for their particular content, some of which is going to be shared with others. You know, we're not the only authority for some of that information. But we need to figure out where all of that blends together and how that actually happens within the commons in some way. So I don't know that, you know, I think the mechanics are things that we need to keep working on. We obviously need to fix the scalability challenges around, you know, federated Sparkle and, you know, those kinds of things. Maybe look at some other frameworks that are going to help that happen. You know, but at the same time, the real work needs to be on describing where the same as relationships are and exactly what those mean, whether or not those are, you know, actually exact relationships, or if there's some, you know, caveats to those connections that needs to happen there. So anyway, thanks for having the session, because this is a key thing that we need to do.
Actually, I wanted to. We do have a few people who are involved in WikiCite. I was wondering if any of them could comment on sort of thoughts and plans about where that could go. There was some talk earlier this year about setting up a separate Wikibase. James, do you know anything about that and comment, or anyone else on that? A bunch of comments coming in the chat. Okay. Okay, still hope to hear from somebody from WikiCite, but Andy had a comment about unlimited supply of volunteer resource. Is that the concern there, that separate Wikibases for different things would require their own set of editing community and whatnot? I think, I mean, to some extent, these communities already exist as separate things, like the genealogy community, for example, or people who are interested in chemicals and materials, that kind of thing, legal entities. But you want to say more about if that's not what you're talking about, Andy?
No, that was pretty much what I was talking about. But I think it's over-optimistic to assume that the existing community of genealogists have the skill or interest to maintain their own Wikibase, and the same of astronomers or any other group. Some will, some won't. But the more we duplicate or replicate effort, not necessarily the data, but the effort in maintaining the data, the thinner we're spreading the available number of volunteers. We could already do with more people. Wikipedias could already do with more people. All the various transcribing initiatives around the web could do with more people. And I think anything we could do that reduces that workload has got to be a good thing. And anything we do that increases that workload unnecessarily is in danger of being a bad thing. And that was my concern listening to the discussion earlier.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It does. Yeah. Not sure. I mean, I think it's going to be a matter of experience. But on the other hand, there's definitely some desire to have more than what Wikidata can handle right now, at least on the WikiCite side. Okay, there's some other comments in the chat. What's Wikidata? Yeah, so there's a comment that external IDs kind of work like this already. And maybe that's enough. So we're not talking about, well, at least from my perspective, I mean, external IDs work to identify. I mean, it's an identifier, so it's identifying there's an item that you have, and it's identified as the same as some item in an external database. So great, but what if you want to so list all the authors on a scientific publication, and you don't want to have items for all those authors in your Wikibase? You want to use the items that are in Wikidata for those people. That's not an external ID problem. That's a you know, a statement property value problem that has multiple values. I mean, I guess you can, you need a special property or something to indicate that those were IDs, which is kind of what I'm getting at here is the way to do that. So it's a similar problem, but it's not the same issue. Looking at the other comments. Yeah, so Tuka, the comment there, federating Wikibases won't build a single big knowledge graph, but it's a bit tighter linking than the current external identifiers that link to databases that don't accept feedback and don't have a standard API. Yeah, I think that might be a way to think about it. Okay, Egon linked to a fabricated task. Using Sparkle Federation for Scalia queries. Okay, we'll have to look at that. That looks important. Okay. Question, is WikiCite necessary with OpenAlex in the mix and humming along nicely? Maybe not. That's a good question. Egon asks, how many items can a Wikibase on Wikibase Cloud currently hold? Anybody know that?
Lawrence posted a link to the listing of the public Wikibases on Wikibase Cloud, and the biggest one is currently 1 million.
Okay. So Egon mentioned about OpenAlex. Actually, I'm pretty sure that OpenAlex is actually using Wikidata author relationships and that sort of thing as part of their data input for their data. Now, obviously, our stuff is pretty incomplete, but I think it is one element of what they're doing. And yes, there is the issue of it not being crowdsourced, so it's a different project. Okay. Lawrence's comment about skill levels, different partitioning. Yeah, I think that's a good point. It may. It's possible that having Federation working more easily might increase our supply of volunteers to work on this stuff. So that could be good. Does this really not to? All right, a lot of good comments. I don't know if there's anything anybody else wants to raise their hand and actually talk about it, or we can continue discussion online. I think there's some things to do here. It sounds like maybe the best next step would be looking into how to set up a separate Wikibase with its own extension for this kind of thing and try to implement it. Does that make sense? Where are all the cases? Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Arthur, for leading this discussion. And yes, if no one else wants to unmute and discuss, I suggest that the discussions keep going in the chat of GT and maybe later on also on some. There are some existing Telegram groups, both for WikiCite and Wikibase, and also Wikibase Cloud, I believe, or some other discussion channels. So thank you so much for raising these points.